It was a bright Monday morning at Westbridge High School, one of the most prestigious schools in the city. Known for its academic excellence and strict code of conduct, Westbridge prided itself on shaping students into respectful, responsible individuals. The school motto, "Character above all," was etched in bold letters on the stone archway at the entrance, a constant reminder of the values the school stood for. Jake Thompson, however, seemed immune to those values. Jake was one of the school's most well-known students, but not for the right reasons. Tall, with a confident smirk always plastered on his face, he carried himself like he owned the place. His father was a wealthy businessman and a major donor to the school, which made Jake feel untouchable. He had a knack for finding people's weaknesses and turning them into jokes. To him, it was all harmless fun, but his classmates, and the people he targeted, thought otherwise. Jake was almost always surrounded by a small group of friends who laughed at his jokes, no matter how cruel. They acted more like his audience than his friends, egging him on and feeding his ego. Then there was Mr. Howard, the school janitor. Mr. Howard was an older man, perhaps in his late 50s, with salt and pepper hair and a calm demeanor. He was always seen quietly going about his work, whether it was sweeping the halls or fixing leaky faucets. He never spoke much, but his kind smile and polite nods made him approachable. The students didn't know much about him, and most didn't care to. To many, he was just the janitor. Despite the school's focus on respect, people like Jake ignored the rules when it came to someone like Mr. Howard. After all, who would stand up for a janitor? And so, life went on at Westbridge High, with Jake entertaining himself at the expense of others and Mr. Howard keeping his head down, doing his job. But things were about to change, and it all started on an ordinary lunchtime in the school's bustling hallway. Jake was the kind of kid who seemed to carry an air of entitlement wherever he went. Tall, with a swagger that made him stand out in a crowd, he had a sharp tongue and a knack for finding people's weak spots. At school, his popularity came from his confidence and charisma, but beneath it all, he had a cruel streak that he directed at anyone he considered beneath him. He loved an audience, and the halls of the school often became his stage. Whether it was a shy student fumbling with their locker or a cafeteria worker struggling to clean up a spill, Jake always had a cutting remark ready. "Is that the best you can do?" he'd scoff, his voice dripping with mockery, making sure his friends laughed along. Mr. Howard, the janitor, was one of his favorite targets. Mr. Howard was quiet and unassuming, always dressed in his blue work uniform with a gray cap pulled low over his head. He went about his work with a calm efficiency, never engaging in the drama that swirled around him. Jake, however, couldn't resist. "Hey, Mr. Clean," he called out one day, leaning against the wall as Mr. Howard pushed his mop across the hallway floor. "Don't you ever get tired of cleaning up after everyone?" Mr. Howard glanced up briefly, his expression neutral. "Just doing my job," he said evenly, then returned to his task. But Jake wasn't satisfied with that. He snickered, gesturing to his friends. "Bet you didn't dream of being a janitor when you were a kid, huh? Or maybe you did." Laughter echoed around the hall as Jake's friends joined in. Mr. Howard didn't react. He simply continued mopping, his movements steady and deliberate, as if Jake's words had no weight. The lack of reaction frustrated Jake. He thrived on getting under people's skin, and Mr. Howard's calm demeanor felt like a challenge. "Come on, Mr. Howard, tell us," Jake pressed, smirking. "Is this what success looks like?" But Mr. Howard didn't take the bait. He just gave a small smile and replied, "Success isn't about what you do, Jake. It's about how you do it." Jake rolled his eyes, but something about Mr. Howard's quiet confidence unsettled him. He turned to his friends, muttering something about how weird the janitor was, and strutted away. Yet, deep down, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, there was more to Mr. Howard than met the eye. It was lunchtime, and the hallways of Westbridge High buzzed with the chatter and laughter of students. Groups of friends crowded near their lockers, while others hurried to grab a bite from the cafeteria before their next class. Among them was Jake, strutting through the halls with his usual air of confidence, flanked by his loyal group of friends. Near the main staircase, Mr. Howard was quietly cleaning up a spill from a tipped-over soda can. He knelt on the floor with a cloth, carefully wiping the tiles so no one would slip. Beside him, a mop bucket filled with soapy water stood precariously close to the edge of the hallway. Jake spotted him and slowed his pace, a mischievous grin forming on his face. He motioned to his friends to follow his lead. "Hey, Mr. Clean!" Jake called out, his voice loud enough to draw attention from nearby students. "You missed a spot over there. Or is this high-tech janitor work too much for you to handle?" A few students chuckled nervously, but most turned away, pretending not to hear. They knew better than to challenge Jake. Mr. Howard paused, glancing up at Jake briefly. "Just doing my job, Jake," he replied evenly, his voice calm and measured. Then, he turned back to his cleaning, unbothered by the taunts. But Jake wasn't done. "Your job, huh?" Jake said, stepping closer. "What's it like, spending your life mopping up after other people? Must be a real dream come true." His friends burst into laughter, egging him on. Mr. Howard didn't respond. He kept wiping the floor, his face calm, though his hands moved with a little more purpose. Jake's smirk widened. He wanted a reaction. He crouched down beside the mop bucket, his eyes gleaming with mischief. "Careful, Mr. Howard," he said mockingly, "wouldn't want this to tip over." Before anyone could react, Jake gave the bucket a firm shove with his foot. The dirty, soapy water sloshed out, spreading across the clean tiles in a wide puddle. A collective gasp rippled through the hallway. For a moment, silence hung in the air. Mr. Howard looked at the mess, then up at Jake, his face expressionless. He didn't yell or scold. Instead, he stood up slowly, wiped his hands on a towel, and met Jake's gaze with quiet dignity. "Are you proud of yourself, Jake?" he asked, his voice calm but steady. Before Jake could respond, a sharp voice cut through the tension. "Jake Thompson." Ms. Carter, one of the school's strictest teachers, strode into the scene, her heels clicking loudly against the floor. Her eyes blazed as she looked between the spilled water and Jake's smug face. "What on earth do you think you're doing?" she demanded. Jake's confidence faltered slightly, but he quickly shrugged it off. "It was an accident," he said casually, though the grin on his face told a different story. "An accident?" Ms. Carter's voice was icy. "You expect me to believe that? Clean this up immediately." Jake hesitated, but one look at Ms. Carter's stern face told him she wasn't asking. He grabbed the mop, his friends awkwardly shuffling away. As Jake worked in silence, Ms. Carter turned to Mr. Howard. "I'm so sorry this happened," she said, her tone softening. Mr. Howard smiled faintly. "It's all right, Ms. Carter. Thank you for stepping in." But as the students slowly dispersed, whispering about what they'd just seen, Jake's punishment felt light compared to the humiliation Mr. Howard had endured. For Jake, it was just another joke gone too far. For Mr. Howard, however, it was a moment that would soon reveal far more than anyone at Westbridge High could have imagined. The following morning, the students of Westbridge High shuffled into the grand auditorium, filling the rows of seats as murmurs rippled through the crowd. Assemblies were common, but this one had an unusual air of mystery. A notice had gone out the previous evening, declaring that all students and staff were required to attend for an important announcement. Jake sat near the back with his friends, scrolling through his phone with an air of disinterest. "Probably just another speech about the school motto or something," he muttered, leaning back in his seat. The stage was empty except for a podium adorned with the Westbridge logo. The murmurs grew louder as everyone speculated about what was happening. Then, the lights dimmed, and the chatter ceased. The sound of footsteps echoed as someone walked onto the stage. Jake's eyes narrowed as he recognized the figure. It was Mr. Howard, but he looked completely different. Gone was the janitor's uniform and the stooped posture. He now wore a sharp, tailored suit, and he carried himself with an undeniable authority. His salt and pepper hair was neatly combed, and his polished shoes gleamed under the stage lights. The auditorium fell silent. Mr. Howard stepped up to the podium and adjusted the microphone. He scanned the room, his calm gaze landing briefly on each section of students. Jake shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Good morning, everyone," Mr. Howard began, his voice steady and commanding. "I'd like to introduce myself properly. My name is Edward Howard, and as of this semester, I am your new principal." A wave of stunned whispers swept through the crowd. Jake sat frozen, his jaw slightly slack. Mr. Howard continued, unbothered by the murmurs. "Some of you may be wondering why I've spent the past few weeks working as your janitor. Allow me to explain." He paused, letting his words sink in. "When I accepted this position, I wanted to understand the true culture of this school, not the one presented in polished brochures or reports, but the one lived by its students and staff every day. So, I decided to take on a different role to observe how people treat one another, especially those they perceive as beneath them." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. "In my time as your janitor, I witnessed moments of kindness and respect, qualities this school claims to value. But I also saw moments that were deeply disappointing. Moments where the school's motto, character above all, was ignored." Mr. Howard's gaze swept the room again, pausing ever so briefly on Jake, who quickly looked down at his lap. "I won't call anyone out by name today," Mr. Howard said, his tone firm yet compassionate. "This assembly is not about shaming individuals. It's about reminding all of us, students, teachers, and staff, that respect is not just a word carved into the walls of this school. It's a principle we must live by, every single day." The room was so quiet that the sound of a pin dropping would have been deafening. Mr. Howard's expression softened slightly as he concluded. "Westbridge High has the potential to be a place where everyone feels valued, regardless of their role. But that begins with you, the students. I hope that my time as Mr. Howard the janitor has given all of us something to reflect on." "Thank you." The room erupted into applause, some hesitant, others enthusiastic. Jake clapped along stiffly, his mind racing with a mix of embarrassment and guilt. As Mr. Howard stepped off the stage, the students filed out of the auditorium, their conversations buzzing with excitement and shock. For many, the speech was a wake-up call. For Jake, it was the start of a reckoning he hadn't anticipated. The atmosphere in the auditorium remained tense even after Mr. Howard's powerful speech. The students had begun to leave when Mr. Howard's voice rang out again, calm but firm. "Before we end today, I'd like to address something specific." The students froze mid-step, their chatter dying down instantly. Slowly, they returned to their seats, their eyes wide with curiosity. Mr. Howard stood at the edge of the stage, his hands clasped in front of him. His gaze was steady but kind. "Yesterday, an incident occurred in the hallway. Many of you witnessed it, and for those who didn't, you've likely heard about it by now." A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Jake, seated near the back, felt his heart drop. His palms grew clammy as he avoided eye contact with everyone around him. "I won't name names," Mr. Howard continued, his tone gentle yet authoritative, "but I will say this, moments like those are what define us, not just as students or staff, but as people. How we treat others, especially those we perceive as different or less important, reveals our true character." He paused, letting his words settle over the room. Jake squirmed in his seat, a knot tightening in his stomach. "Let me share a little about myself," Mr. Howard said, his voice softening. "I wasn't always a principal. In fact, I didn't even finish high school on time. My family struggled to make ends meet, and I had to work nights as a janitor to support them. I was mocked for my job, much like some of you mocked me here. But I kept going because I believed in the value of hard work and kindness." The room was utterly silent now, every student hanging on to his words. "Eventually, I earned my diploma, went to college, and worked my way up to where I am today. But I've never forgotten where I came from. I've never forgotten what it feels like to be looked down upon, to be treated as though you're less than human simply because of the job you do." Mr. Howard's voice wavered slightly, but he quickly steadied himself. "That's why respect matters to me. Not because it's part of this school's motto, but because I've lived a life where respect wasn't given freely. And I know how much it can mean to someone when it is. The students sat in stunned silence, many looking down at their hands, reflecting on their own actions. Mr. Howard's gaze fell on Jake, who sat rigid in his seat, his face pale. To the student involved in yesterday's incident, Mr. Howard said gently, "I'm not here to shame you. I'm here to encourage you to think about the kind of person you want to be. I know you're capable of better, and I'd like to see you take the first step by offering an apology, not just to me, but to everyone you've hurt." Jake felt a lump rise in his throat. He wanted to disappear, but there was nowhere to hide. Slowly, he stood, his legs trembling. His voice was barely above a whisper as he said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Howard." The principal nodded, his expression warm. "Thank you, Jake. I hope this is the beginning of a positive change, for you and for everyone here." Jake sat down, his face burning with shame. But mixed with that shame was a sense of relief, as though a weight had been lifted. As the assembly ended and the students filed out, many looked at Mr. Howard with newfound respect. And though Jake remained quiet for the rest of the day, he couldn't shake the image of Mr. Howard standing on that stage, sharing his story. For the first time in his life, Jake began to truly reflect on the kind of person he wanted to become. The days following the assembly were some of the hardest Jake had ever faced. Everywhere he went, he could feel the weight of people's eyes on him. Some students whispered as he passed, while others avoided him altogether. The laughter and popularity that once fueled his confidence had vanished, replaced by a gnawing sense of shame. Jake replayed Mr. Howard's words over and over in his mind, "How we treat others reveals our true character." He couldn't ignore the truth anymore. His actions had been cruel, and for the first time, he saw himself as others must have, a bully. After a week of reflection, Jake made a decision. He needed to do more than just say sorry during the assembly. He needed to apologize sincerely and take steps to make things right. During lunch one day, Jake mustered the courage to approach Mr. Howard, who was tidying the school garden. Jake hesitated for a moment, watching as Mr. Howard carefully planted a row of vibrant flowers. "Mr. Howard?" Jake's voice was quiet, almost hesitant. Mr. Howard looked up, his expression calm but curious. "Yes, Jake?" Jake took a deep breath, his heart pounding. I wanted to apologize again. For everything. What I did was wrong, and I've been thinking about it a lot. I didn't treat you, or anyone, with respect, and I'm really sorry." Mr. Howard studied Jake for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Thank you, Jake. That means a lot. Apologizing takes courage, but it's only the first step. What matters is what you do from here." Jake nodded quickly. "I want to do better. I really do." A faint smile crossed Mr. Howard's face. "That's a good place to start. I'll help you, Jake, if you're willing to put in the effort." From that day on, Jake began to change. It wasn't easy. He had to confront his own insecurities and the habits he had built over years of seeking attention through mockery. But Mr. Howard was there to guide him, offering advice and encouragement when Jake struggled. One afternoon, Mr. Howard invited Jake to help him with a project, restoring an old bench in the school courtyard. As they sanded the wood and painted it a fresh coat of deep brown, Mr. Howard shared more about his life, the struggles he'd faced, and the people who had shown him kindness when he needed it most. "Kindness isn't about grand gestures," Mr. Howard said, wiping his hands on a rag. "It's about the small things, treating people with dignity, even when no one's watching. It's the foundation of real strength." Jake took those words to heart. Slowly but surely, he started treating others differently. He stopped mocking his classmates and began standing up for students who were picked on. He even surprised his teachers by volunteering for school events and helping with small tasks without being asked. His efforts didn't go unnoticed. At first, people were skeptical, thinking his change was temporary. But over time, they saw that Jake was genuine. The same students who had once avoided him began to open up, and he found himself building real friendships for the first time. One day, as Jake walked through the hallway, he saw a younger student struggling to carry a stack of books. Without hesitation, Jake stepped in to help. "Thanks," the student said, surprised but grateful. Jake smiled. "No problem. Let me know if you ever need a hand." As Jake continued on his way, he spotted Mr. Howard down the hall, watching with a knowing smile. Jake nodded in acknowledgement, feeling a sense of pride that had nothing to do with popularity or power. Under Mr. Howard's mentorship, Jake not only became a better person but also inspired others to follow his lead. The change wasn't just in him, it began to ripple through the school, reminding everyone that kindness and respect truly mattered. Under Mr. Howard's leadership, Westbridge High began to change. His unique approach to understanding the school's true culture set a precedent for honesty and accountability. Assemblies became more than just routine, they were spaces for open dialogue about respect, kindness, and the power of personal growth. Students who once ignored the school's motto, "Character above all," began to take it seriously. Acts of kindness became more common, and even the quietest students felt safer and more valued. Teachers, inspired by Mr. Howard's example, became more invested in nurturing not just academic success but also the emotional well-being of their students. At the heart of this shift was Jake. Jake's transformation wasn't instant, but it was real. He became an advocate for the very values he had once ignored. In class discussions, he spoke about the importance of respect and empathy. When bullying incidents arose, Jake stepped in, not as the aggressor he once was, but as a mediator who sought to help both parties understand each other. One day, the school held a Respect and Kindness Week, a new initiative spearheaded by the Student Council. Jake volunteered to organize a series of workshops, sharing his journey and encouraging others to reflect on their own behavior. His honesty resonated with many students who saw his story as proof that change was possible. The week culminated in a ceremony in the school courtyard, where students and staff gathered to celebrate the community they were building together. As the event wound down, Jake noticed Mr. Howard standing by the freshly restored bench they had worked on together. Jake walked over, his hands in his pockets. "Hey, Mr. Howard," he said, smiling. Mr. Howard turned, his face lighting up. "Hello, Jake. Enjoying the event?" "Yeah," Jake said, glancing around at the students laughing and talking. "It's nice. Feels like the school's finally living up to its motto, you know?" Mr. Howard nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "It does. And you played a big part in that, Jake. You should be proud of yourself." Jake looked down, a faint blush coloring his cheeks. "I don't know about that. I mean, I've done a lot of things I'm not proud of." Mr. Howard placed a hand on Jake's shoulder, his grip firm but warm. "We all have, Jake. What matters is how we choose to move forward. And you've chosen to be better. That's not just admirable, it's rare." For a moment, Jake didn't know what to say. Then, he smiled. "Thanks, Mr. Howard. For everything. I don't think I would have changed if it wasn't for you." Mr. Howard chuckled softly. "I think you would have found your way eventually, Jake. But I'm glad I could help." As the two stood by the bench, the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the courtyard. The chatter and laughter of students filled the air, a testament to how much had changed. Jake extended his hand, and Mr. Howard shook it firmly. There was a mutual understanding between them now, a bond forged through challenge and growth. "Thank you," Jake said again, his voice steady. "You're welcome, Jake," Mr. Howard replied. "Just keep moving forward. And remember, respect isn't just about how you treat others. It's about how you treat yourself, too." Jake nodded, the words sinking deep into his heart. As he walked away, he felt lighter, more at peace with himself than he had in years. Westbridge High had become more than just a prestigious school. It was now a place where kindness flourished, where second chances were possible, and where a simple janitor could become the catalyst for profound change. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story and found its message inspiring, we'd love your support. Don't forget to Sparkles like this video to show your appreciation and help it reach more viewers. Speech balloon, comment below with your thoughts or share your own experiences. We'd love to hear from you. Link, share this story with your friends and family to spread the message of respect and kindness. Push pin, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more meaningful stories like this one. Your support means the world to us and helps us create content that inspires and connects us all. Thank you for being part of our journey. Yellow heart.